And President Trump indicated over the weekend that he is leaning towards a course of action in Venezuela, following multiple high-level briefings. Officials presented options ranging from airstrikes on military and drug trafficking targets to an attempted, alleged, to remove President Maduro from government. The US has significantly increased its presence in the Caribbean under Operation Southern Spear, deploying 15,000 troops, over a dozen warships, the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, and 10 F-35 jets to Puerto Rico. Experts call this military buildup the most significant US deployment in the region since the 1989 Panama invasion. Trump has expressed caution over potential risks to use US personnel and long-term involvement, while Maduro has warned that any intervention could spark conflict similar to Afghanistan or Vietnam. Analysts say a regime change effort could yield political gains, but carries high risk of prolonged military engagement and opposition fractures. Joining us now is Raymond Vickery. He's a former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce and joins us live from Washington, D.C. Raymond, it's always a pleasure to have you here on the program. Of course, experts are calling this the largest military buildup in the Caribbean since 1989. Your thoughts on how, if it may escalate, and what happens next?
Well, thanks very much for having me. You know, in order to build peace and prosperity in the world, it's necessary to have strategy and partners. But President Trump has really jettisoned this approach in favor of really a throwback to earlier 19th century, very early 20th century U.S. approaches, which are really in the nature of quasi-empire building, if you will. You'll remember that early on he talked about Canada as a 51st state, acquiring Greenland. Now, particularly with Secretary Rubio, who has strong ties, as you know, in the Latin American region, he's turned his interest to Latin America. And what he is doing here is putting together a force which will work, he thinks, to aggrandize himself, his own reputation, as well as having a throwback, as I say, to an earlier period of empire building. Unfortunately, this fits with his overall view of international relations, that great powers can divide up the world and have influence in their own spheres. You see this in his approach in regard to Russia and Ukraine. You even see it in regard to China. The concept is the old one that we have our empire, you have your empire, and we are able then to have greatness thrust upon us in an historical perspective. It's a very, very unfortunate development. It's directly counter to what happened after World War II, because when you have these concepts of empire, eventually what happens is war breaks out, because the history of the world has shown that empires rub up against each other, and you have further conflict. Since World War II, with the United Nations Charter, we tried to have a different choice, moving forward under principles of non-aggression, non-invasion. Unfortunately, our president seems to have jettisoned this in favor of the old-time religion of I'll be great because I'll take over other people's territory.
Raymond, what objective would Washington realistically achieve in direct involvement with Venezuela? And where does this play into the narrative of the United States' involvement in leftist governments in Latin America?
Well, I don't think really that the United States will, in the longer run, achieve anything at all. This approach of aggression in order to rectify what are admittedly problems. I mean, nobody thinks the Maduro government is a great institution. But the problem is the approach and whether in the longer term you're building something which is really America first or is some other concept that America first means domination of others. And in the longer run, this doesn't work. In the short run, of course, Trump is very transactional. And he looks at it in the immediate effect. If you look at Venezuela, there's oil, obviously. It's the old-time way of looking at aggrandizement, which means basically that you take over assets and natural resources, people, in order to be able to enrich yourself. This doesn't work. In regard to leftist governments, we tried through covert action and even overt action in Chile, the overthrow of the government down there, and we've had this approach, of sending the Marines whenever there's a problem in a country which you don't like. The lesson of history is this does not work in the interest of the United States and is a complete reversal of what the approach has been, as I say, since World War II in regard to Latin America. You will notice that the Pan-American Summit, which was scheduled for next month in the Dominican Republic, has been canceled. And it's been canceled basically because the United States loses interest under President Trump in a multilateral rule of law approach in favor of my way or the highway. It's a very, very distressing development, but is one with what the Trump administration foreign policy is around the world.
Raymond, thank you so much. Do stay with us as we have a further update. Samsung Electronics, Hyundai Motors, and other major South Korean manufacturers announced new domestic investment plans following a US trade deal that raised concerns about weakening local manufacturing. Samsung will add a memory chip production line at its Pyeongtaek plant as part of a 450 trillion won in domestic investments over the next 5 years. The move comes amid surging global demand for AI chips and rising semiconductor prices. Mass production at the new P5 plant is expected to begin in 2028. Hyundai Motor announced domestic investments worth 125.2 trillion won from 2026 to 2030, while shipbuilders Hanwha Ocean and HD Hyundai also unveiled expansion plans. President Lee Jae-myung urged companies to maintain domestic investments and consult with the government to optimize the $350 billion US-bound investment package. Samsung said the plan will create quality jobs and support small, medium, and venture companies, preparing for long-term growth in AI-driven memory semiconductor demand. This is what both the parties said.
좋은 상황을 만들기보다는 나쁜 상황을 만들지 않는 게 최선이기 때문에 매우 어려운 과정이었다는 여러분도 잘 아실 것 같습니다. 그럼에도 불구하고 어쨌든 남들이 예상하지 못한 성과라면 성과, 방어를 아주 잘 해낸 것 같습니다.
국내 산업 투자가 축소될 걱정을 하셨는데 일부에서는 우려가 있겠지만 그런 일이 없도록 저희 삼성은 국내 투자 확대 또 청년의 좋은 일자리 창출 그리고 또 아까 말씀하신 상생도 중소기업, 벤처기업과의 상생도 더더욱.
Okay, joining us now is Raymond Vickery once again. Samsung and Hyundai are both expanding massively at home right after this US trade deal raised concern about weakening Korean manufacturing. From the US perspective, does this mean fewer American manufacturing jobs than Washington expected?
Well, it certainly shows the perils and difficulties of abandoning a multilateral, market-driven approach to international economics in favor of the one-off transactional approach which President Trump and his administration have embarked upon. What has happened here, and will be repeated again and again, wherever President Trump has made a so-called deal, is that when you don't resort to economic factors in determining where investments take place, the terms of trade, but you try to set up a transaction, a deal in which the United States wins and other people lose, you destroy the market-based approach, which has made the United States the most prosperous nation in the world. And so what happens is, if you have a deal in South Korea's instance, in which South Korea says, in turn for your lowering tariffs on us from 25 to 15%, we'll put in $360 billion into the U.S. economy. And then the question is, well, wait a minute, what happens in terms of needed investment in South Korea? What happens to the building of jobs there? If it's not going to be based upon market considerations, but just the outcome of a transactional approach like a real estate deal, what happens? And so the South Korean president is trying to ameliorate this overall problem by pulling together the leaders of industry in South Korea and say, won't you announce the investments in South Korea so that people will not feel that their jobs are being taken away there. This, as I say, is the outcome of taking a short-term transactional approach to international economics, international development. You can't build peace and prosperity on this kind of basis. It is directly contrary to what we have been doing over the past 80 years or so, and is not going to end well, because it is a degeneration and a move away from the basic economic principles which have governed the terms of trade and investment for the past 85 years.
Yes, Raymond Vickery, thank you very much for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure.